Ghana is a signatory to the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, to the Maputo Protocol, and also to the United Nations Agenda 2030 on Sustainable Development. In this light, Ghana has an obligation to work towards achieving gender parity by the year 2030. Ghana's Parliament in the year 2024 passed the Affirmative Action Bill, that's also the Gender Equity Bill, to work to address issues of gender imbalance and to create a country where there is equal representation of the female gender and the role that females play is not underplayed. In this conversation today, we as young people will be delving into issues of gender imbalance, how the Affirmative Action Bill can work to address the issues that we face today, and also possibilities, challenges, and what the future is going to look like now that we have the Affirmative Action Bill. I am Maame, Ekua, Otenewa, Oduro, a delegate of the 5th cohort of the Young Diplomats of Ghana program, and I will be your host for today. With me are...
I am Hassan Diabate, alum of Young Diplomats of Ghana and a lawyer.
I'm Anne-Marie Natoshi Provencal, a delegate of the 5th cohort of the Young Diplomats of Ghana. I'm also a final year student at the Ghana School of Law.
I'm Godslove Bogobley, a YDG alum and a lawyer.
We are lucky to have you all today. Welcome. We look forward to an insightful discussion. So I would like to start with you, Bogo. People make the arguments that the Affirmative Action Bill is a women's bill. Basing off of what you have read, do you agree that it's only targeted at women's rights, or is there space for men to also benefit from the provisions under the bill?
Good morning. Thank you for having me. So first of all, I'll say that yes, it is a women's bill, but I don't see how that is a problem, because as you rightly indicated, the statistics clearly show that the women have been discriminated against time and time again. And so it is only right that a bill that seeks to correct this inequality will be focused solely on women. And so you look at the objectives of the bill, they talk about the fact that the object of the bill is to ensure the achievement of gender inequality in the political, social, economic, education, and cultural space. If currently the gender parity is slanted towards one side, that is the male, then it will only make sense that an effort to correct the gender equality problem will be focused on females, women.
Okay, so looking at the objectives of the bill, do you think it aligns with our constitutional obligations, looking at Article 17 of the Constitution, Article 35, because I have also heard people make the argument that when we look at Article 94 on political parties and who they choose to present for elections, if the bill is stipulating quotas that they must meet, then that's not entirely constitutional. Do you agree? Do you disagree? What do you make of that?
Yeah. So, first of all, the bill's objects are actually in line with our constitutional and treaty obligations. So you have the fundamental human rights provisions in the Constitution guaranteeing freedom from discrimination. You have the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. All these are aimed at eliminating gender discrepancies in our country. The bill seeks to do that. Yes, if there are any concerns regarding whether or not some parts of the bill might be in contravention of the Constitution, that may be a fair concern, but then that does not mean that the bill as a whole is in contravention of the Constitution, because the Constitution guarantees freedom from discrimination. The Constitution puts a duty on the state to correct issues of gender equality, and this bill is the government's way of doing that.
Okay, so Hassan, to you, when we look at communities that have very entrenched cultural values, do you think they would be open to the provisions of this bill, or would they perceive it as merely an imposition of foreign culture on them? Do you think it's workable in maybe communities that don't seem to believe that women and men should enjoy equal rights?
Okay, so I'll just add to what Bogobley just said on the fact that the objects of the bill are in line with the Constitution. So we have a set of political, economic, and social goals which we refer to as the directive principles of state policy and are contained in Chapter 6 of the Constitution. and then they all are geared towards the fact that we should take active steps to ensure gender equality in all spheres of life. So, just to add to what he said. And to communities that believe that any attempt to ensure gender equality is Eurocentric, I think is a confirmation of our ingrained biases that women are generally less or are inferior to men. So I think with education, with exposure, we've come to realize that women are actually not inferior to men. I'm sure you've heard of the statement that generally that what men can do, women can do better. So I believe it's in the right step.
Okay. So Anne-Marie, now coming to you, in your personal life, have you had any experiences where you have felt that this certainly wouldn't have happened to me if I were not a woman? Have you been put in positions where you have felt discriminated against on the basis of your gender?
Okay, so personally, I haven't really experienced any form of discrimination when it comes to, gender. But then I've heard people's stories about wanting to enter certain places of work, and then they're told that this role is a man's role, and so far as you're in there, you're going to have trouble. We even have issues of women being scared to take up places of position in work because they think that they would have to sleep with some sort of person to be able to get wherever they get to, because it is assumed that as a woman, it's not that easy to get to the top, right? So personally, I haven't had that experience, but then we all know that it's a normal thing that happens. But I believe this bill is a right step to, eliminate all forms of gender discrimination towards women. And one thing I would say in relation to the bill on the directive policy, which says that persons can be exempted from the whole gender issue if they can show that that role is suited for a male specifically. So even though the bill is directed at promoting gender equality, I believe that section is a bit problematic, because if at the end of the day we are trying to achieve equality, then why then are we still thinking that certain roles are specifically for men?
So in employment law, we have what we call bona fide occupational qualification, which is a legal concept which provides that there are certain jobs which innately should be limited or reserved only for a specific gender. It could be men or it could be women. Earlier, Bogobley and I were having this conversation, and I mentioned the fact that if you are recruiting people to work as washroom attendants, and then it's a female washroom, it won't be discriminatory to insist that you want to recruit only women for that. It's the same when you are recruiting security personnel at the airport to conduct searches. Because generally, for personal comfort and privacy, it works best if you employ or you recruit people of a specific gender who will be working on, like, with people in that gender. You understand? And it's also similar when you are talking about hiring and casting people in the theater industry. So it won't be discriminatory that I'm insisting that I want to recruit or cast a man to play a male role in a movie. Because if we allow that, if we say it is discriminatory or we find issue with BOQF, then we'll have situation where men would insist that they want to play roles of women in movies. So I think it's a fair balance in ensuring gender equality, but at the same time, we do not take away privacy, comfort.
So a typical example of this is, under the Criminal Offences Procedure Act, it is only women, female police officers, who are allowed to conduct searches on women. Yes, so that's what this is about. Okay,
so back to you, Bogo. This act makes provision for quotas and has specific provisions on how to increase women's participation in Parliament. People make the argument that elections are competitive. We can't just say that because people are women, everyone should throw their support behind them and find ways to ensure that they end up in Parliament. Do you think the provisions that the Affirmative Action Bill has on increasing women's participation in Parliament are workable? Do you see it making some real impact in the next few years? Do you have any concerns?
So first of all, I would say that the provisions in the Act with respect to gender equality in Parliament do not necessarily require that the Speaker maybe set specific quotas with respect to the number of MPs and the number of members of committees and whatnot. But to answer your question directly, I would say that quotas, for me, quotas may not be necessarily the best way of handling such things, because for something like elections, at the end of the day, it boils down to who the people want as their representative in Parliament. So what the political parties can do, or what, in fact, the focus will be on the processes prior to the person entering Parliament, because like I said, with entering Parliament, it is the choice of the people. At the processes that precede entering Parliament, the nomination processes and whatnot, that is where you can engage in education to try and change the mindset of the people. You know that already there are different filing fees for men and women. Typically, the women's filing fees are less than the men's filing fees. The political parties, or let me speak to what I know. I checked the NPP. The NPP has lower filing fees for women than men. I assume it's the same for the NDC and others. You look at the EC when they are filing nomination forms for the presidency, it costs less for women than men, all in an attempt to encourage more female participation. But then the problem boils down to the earlier question you asked about the societal attitudes that people have. Because, as you've already stated, in spite of the incentives that have been provided by the EC and the political parties, some way, somehow, men still dominate the nominations filed. So that clearly points to a societal problem. If you now try to institute specific quotas in Parliament, that would amount to undermining the will of the people. So the focus now should be on changing the will of the people to a mindset that encourages much more female participation in Parliament.
Okay, so
let me just add that, which progressively we hope to achieve. But I think what the bill also seeks to do is, looking at a specific Ghanaian context, election into Parliament is mainly won because of your political party affiliations. So the bill has made provision that in safe seats where maybe a political party believes that area to be its stronghold, whoever they present forward may or is more likely to win. So in such situation, the bill is insisting or is recommending that the political parties should nominate women for such seats, because in any case they would win. But it doesn't take away from the fact that, like Bogobley just said, we have an attitudinal problem. So it's not as if whoever with the women are not more qualified, but just that the populace and the constituents end up voting more for men. But if it happens that this political party knows that this is their stronghold and they nominate a woman, it's more likely the woman will enter Parliament.
okay, so now back to you, Anne-Marie. The bill also has provisions on inclusion of women in the private sector. Do you think that it's fair to employers for the law to make specific quotas, if you may, requiring them to have this percentage of female participation in their private businesses, and also to impose sanctions where they do not? Do you think that's workable? And if you were an employer, how would that be for you?
Okay, so like we said earlier, the bill seeks to, eliminate all forms of discrimination. And so this is a step in the right direction, in the sense that these are the ways in which we can implement whatever the bill sets to achieve, right? So as an employer, and maybe I would come from a biased point of view because I'm a woman, I would obviously encourage, my firm or my company to employ as many women as possible, because that's the only way that we can bridge the gap between all these forms of discrimination. But then, it's workable in the sense that so far as we've been able to employ men who have equally functioned as well as women, then I don't see the reason why we can't have women taking up these spaces as well, because we need to do it for people to see that women are capable, right? And I would like to even reference the recent president of the Ghana Bar Association who was elected, Ifogati, right? So, I mean, these things are going to encourage young people out there to take up spaces, take away all the cultural, backward mentality that we have. So I believe if I were an employer, I would, ensure that I'll have as many women as possible to encourage whatever that we seek to set out in this bill.
Okay, but Anne-Marie, you speak of cultural and other perceptions of why people don't employ women, but practically speaking, you're an employer, you have 7 employees who are female, they are young, they just got married. 3 years after their marriage, that's when people normally have kids. Yeah. Can you have 3 years where 5 of those employees are pregnant back to back to back? As an employer, how do you think your business would thrive? How do you think we as a people can balance the interest of not breaking down the family unit while also safeguarding the rights of employers with the reproductive rights of women?
Okay, that's an interesting one. Procreation is going to happen anyways, right? And we need to acknowledge the fact that there's nothing that can be done about women birthing, right? But then there are so many ways in which we can ensure that it still works, even as we have women giving birth and having to cater for their families and everything. You have firms, you have companies that ensure that they have hours for. Some companies allow for people to bring their employees to bring in their children, some sort of daycare, give them some form of leave. You can even work remotely. I mean, if you want it to work, you make it work. You understand? So if we keep looking at it from this angle, then we're never going to implement anything that we set out to do, right? So I believe this is just one of the few ways in which we can ensure that women are able to work and work well in these spaces. Yeah.
So if I may, at the end of the day, the employer is a businessman.
Yeah.
Right? So if the employer is being mandated by law to employ women and he feels like it will be detrimental to his business, then he will be reluctant to. Because at the end of the day, with the example that Otenewa gave, if there are 7 women and they are going on maternity leave back to back to back, it will affect the employer. I mean, very, very much affect the employer. But what can be done, I think Otenewa mentioned it in a conversation that we're having, the government can look at providing incentives. The issue of incentives, it's a little hard to implement, but then the idea is if the government is able to find a way to make it at least easier for the employer to have his female workers on maternity leave, or even make it more profitable for him, they'll be willing to do it. They will hire as many women as they want if it is workable. Because at the end of the day, the employer, or at least the average business-minded employer, he is just looking at a way to make profit. And so whether it is men or women who are in his employ, he's looking to make profit, which is ironically why sometimes they prefer the men, because they don't want the women to be going on maternity leave and all that. But if government can find a way, and the Act even makes mention of certain incentives, the issue would be how to make the incentives workable. But I am very positive that if the government finds a way to make sure that employers do not suffer losses when they're because they have hired female employees, they would have absolutely no problem in hiring more female employees.
Yeah,
that's what I think.
Yeah.
So now let's talk about enforcement. So what do you think bodies like the NCCE and the National Labour Commission can do to practically ensure that the objectives of this bill are met? Bogo, can you take that for me?
So first thing I'll say is that the bill gives enforcement of the provisions of the Act to a committee that has been set up under the Act, right? So the committee is responsible for ensuring compliance. They are responsible for bringing to the notice of employers who are in breach of the act and so on. But what the NCCE, for example, can do is to ensure that gender issues are properly incorporated into their mandate. They are in charge of public education. So they are to ensure that at every point in time, gender issues are at the forefront of their advocacy. The National Labour Commission also deals with things like employment issues. So then what they can do is also to take gender-related employment issues much more seriously. So what the National Labour Commission now can do is to also ensure that gender-related issues that come up within their jurisdiction, employment issues, there's an allegation of somebody's contract being terminated because they rejected advances from their boss, things like that, they take them much more seriously, and I think we'll get somewhere under this bill.
Just to add to the bit on offences as a form of regulatory compliance. So, and the Act provides that any person who victimizes, obstructs, or exerts undue influence on a person in an attempt to defeat the object of the Act is liable on some conviction to a fine not less than 6,000 cedis and not more than 12,000 cedis, or a term of imprisonment between 6 months and 12 months. And also, if you engage in stereotyping, gender-specific verbal attacks, and then you discriminate on grounds of gender, you commit an offense. So whether you're in the private sector, you're in public life, you're an employer, you are open to being punished if you fail to advance the object of the Act.
Okay, so now Hassan, you as a young lawyer, what are some practical things you can do to ensure that the objectives of this bill are met?
I think the first thing we can all do is to educate ourselves first and all become gender equality advocates. So the change will always start with us. Then, of course, when we have been able to change our mindsets based on that, we can now identify subtle gender-specific issues at the workplaces in our lives. Once we do that, I'm sure we are able to now effect positive change. In the near future, when we also become employers, having this education, having this training, we know how to go about our recruitment, we know how to go about employing more women than men. Because like you said at the beginning of the show, the statistics show that we have more women in Ghana than men. So it's surprising how at the end of the day, we have more men leading these institutions than women. So I'll just add some small factors also gathered in other countries like Rwanda, Nicaragua, Cuba, and the United Arab Emirates. They have over 50% of their parliamentarians being women. So I think it's an achievable feat. So by 2030, if the Act is implemented the way it hopes to be implemented, I'm sure we can achieve gender equality.
Okay, so Anne-Marie, back to you. What do you think the impact of this bill on gender roles will be in the years to come?
Okay, I believe we would see more women going up for various positions and places of power. Also, just to add to what Hassan was saying earlier, I believe that education is the right step as well. We also have to encourage people to keep on mentoring from schools to institutions, whatever that they can do to ensure that people are, encouraged to take up these spaces, and let them know that even though there are still issues with regard to gender inequality, the only way that we can bridge that gap is to keep to take up these spaces and be different, because there are cases where we say that, okay, we haven't been fair to women, we have to let this woman take this position, the person goes into the place of power and then isn't performing as we expect them to do. And so then the question is, why then do we need women then if they're not going to perform? But truth of the matter is we are having men who are also not performing. So this is just to encourage women in places of power to maximize the opportunity that they have, because they're trailblazers. They're the people that we look up to. They're the people that we can say that, okay, I want to be like this person in future. I would want to emulate whatever the person has come to do or has set out to do. So we just need to ensure that we don't disappoint the rest of the people that look up to us, so that we can be the best mentors that we can.
Just to add to what she said quickly, I think also we should not focus only on women occupying position of power. and end it just there. Because currently we have about 29 countries that have women leading the executive, either president or the prime minister. Countries like Ethiopia, Estonia, Denmark, Georgia, Greece, and the others. But it doesn't just end there, because we have an issue of tokenism, where we just put people from under represented minority groups into position of power, and then ends there. So it's entirely possible that in a country where it's being led by a woman, the gender inequalities there will be worse than a country being led by a man. So the focus should not only be putting women into only powerful positions, but it should be across board. So it starts from the most basic level, schools, recruitment, admissions, recruitment into civil service, public service. Then from there, if they rise up into political power or position of power, then we can now fully trace the gender equality balance.
Okay, Bogo, what do you think the potential socioeconomic benefits of achieving gender parity are, both across the public and private sectors of the country?
Well, the potential is enormous. At the end of the day, the more women there are, it translates into as an employer, it translates into a larger workforce, which can translate into more work being done, more profits being made, and so on. Encouraging more participation is never a bad thing, because at the end of the day, what you are doing is that you are bringing in many more members of the society who hitherto had felt excluded into the conversation. So, for example, more women in parliament or more women in politics would directly translate into more women being interested in politics, which would translate then to an effect at the grassroots level. They are being more engaged in delegate discussions. They are being more engaged in policy discussions, so on and so forth. The same way, more female lawyers, for example, means that an employer who is not discriminatory means he has a wider pool to choose from, and that can only help him, because it would mean that he now gets to pick the best of the best, and he being educated about avoiding gender discrimination means that if the best is a woman, he wouldn't hesitate. He would hire the person, and it can only be better for everyone.
Okay, thank you. So this has been a very insightful discussion. I will take closing comments from everybody. Hassan, I would start with you.
Start with unmarried.
Okay, unmarried.
Okay, I mean, like I said earlier, I'll just encourage all of us out there, women in power, women in whatever spaces they occupy, to perform at their maximum best, because that is what is important. It's not just about having the representation, it's about having it actually working. So we shouldn't just look at the numbers, we should look at the performance as well, because women wield a lot of potential, and so far as you're lucky enough, you're privileged enough to hold these spaces, we have to make the best out of it and then set the pace for the others that are coming as well.
Alright, so my final comment would be that in as much as this act is a step in the right direction, we also have to recognize that there's still a very long way to go. Ghana has a lawyer will tell you, that Ghana has an impressive array of statutes. You can think of the most random thing and there's a statute governing it. But as always, our problem is always implementation.
That's true.
And for this one, this is particularly relevant because this issue that the bill seeks to tackle is a very social issue. It's not just about regulation, because sometimes it is very hard, for example, to prove that the refusal to employ a person was based on gender discrimination and not based on qualification.
Yeah.
So we have to understand that this is a very long fight. This bill is a huge step in the right direction. There is still a long way to go, and we still have to up our game and ensure that we call out instances of gender discrimination wherever we see them.
I believe my co-panelists have said it all. So the only useful thing I'll add is that the targets set in the acts are ambitious, but they are very achievable. So by 2030, if it is fully implemented, we hope to see that gender inequality will be a thing of the past.
Okay, so thank you. And for me, my final comments will be that we as young people have a huge role to play as advocates, as awareness creators, as voices that help to drive the narrative about the power that women wield. Because if women are achieving so much in private life, if women are holding our families and communities together so much, then we can only imagine all that they can achieve if they are equipped to take up their full space in public life. So as we go about our daily activities, let's all consciously and subconsciously work towards a future where women are no longer disadvantaged unduly. So thank you so much for being our audience. It's been lovely having you. Do all to listen to the subsequent episodes and don't forget to subscribe. I'm Otenewa Oduro and thank you once again.